G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today we've reached the next part of my door series for Revit, where we're looking at building door families, and today we're looking at door hardware. So we're looking at handles, closers, and push bars. So in this case, we're going to look at how we can add those to the family that we've been building over the last few parts. Thanks again to Wojciech for requesting these topics, and I hope you found these interesting. So in the running order, we're up to part 4. We've looked at setting up a parametric frame, hinges, and a door leaf, and we're now moving on to looking at hardware. And then from there, we're going to reroute the series a little bit and look at an alternative strategy through which you can actually host your angular elements. So you can actually host them to a reference line, and sometimes this can be an easier method to manage. It just influences how you build all the components. The reason I'm going to show you this method is because this enables us to set up a system by which all our hardware can be swapped at the project level on an instance basis. As well as this, we're also going to finish up just by looking at polishing off the door and setting some 2D graphics. So previously we looked at setting up an angular door that could open and close with a parametric set of hinges, frame, door leaf with protection. But now we're looking at face hosting some door hardware to our leaf, including handles, an optional pull bar or push bar, and door closer. So let's get started. So you will need the files from the previous part, which are available on my GitHub under the Revit families section. There should be a Revit repo with that folder. So I definitely recommend that you get hold of those first. Anyway, we're going to be working with the door that we've been developing during this series. Now, this first part of the tutorial I found sometimes can be really hard to get right. Angled constraints in Revit tend to be very temperamental in my experience. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I found occasionally this first step can be quite problematic, but hopefully we get through it pretty quickly. So just bear with me if it has a few errors at first. So we're going to be working with our door leaf, which is nested in here. I'm going to go to floor plan, and I have found that it's pretty hard to get this to behave the way I intend it to, because I'm going to set up a reference line, which is dimensioned from the end of the door, and I've found if you set yourself to a reflex angle or beyond 90 degrees, it seems to not support setting up this step. And even when you put it in this quadrant by making the swing less than 90 in the family, it can still be quite unpredictable. So what I'm going to do is set myself to probably 60 degrees first, and I'm going to start working with the end of the door. So I'm just going to move this 90-degree constraint in a little bit more. So what I need to do first is create a reference line, and I'm just going to create it pretty arbitrarily, but then I'm just going to pull it back to the 2 reference lines that are being hosted by the family. So I'm going to hide my door leaf, and I'm going to try and dimension from between the 2 reference planes. And I'm going to add a dimension here, and I'm just going to call this handle inset, and I'm going to make it instance based. What I'm also going to try and do is set up a 90-degree constraint between this new reference line and the current one, so the face of the door. And this should hopefully work. If it does, we should be able to set this to any angle. So we're just going to test this, and it may break. I have found that sometimes when you get to the reflex angles again, it breaks. Oh, wow, okay, it worked the first time. I literally had to re-record this whole point up until here because I just could not get Revit to work before. It seems extremely temperamental at handling this part of the workflow. So good news, it seems like it's working with us now. Phew, well that was very fortunate. The dimensions will go pretty crazy, but otherwise it looks like it's all okay. So what we should have now is a reference line that we can host face hosted elements to on the surface of the door. So we're going to start by building a door handle. So in this case, I'm going to go and open my original door protection family, which was a face-based family, so a face-based generic model, which we then turned into some door protection. So I'm going to open up my leaf protection family. And the first thing I'm going to do before I do anything is I'm going to save as and save it as something else. So I'm going to go and create a new subfolder in my little mini library that we've been building and call it hardware. Now, I just wanted to point this out. I don't know if anyone else building families has found that this type selector is constantly getting in the way, but since Revit 2019, I've noticed that the type selector is always getting in the way in the family editor until you go to the ribbon or close the dialog. It's such a pain in the butt. Let me know if anyone else is finding this happens a lot, because yeah, it happens to me all the time. It's driving me crazy. Anyway, I'm just going to call this BG door C handle type 1. So we're just building a generic handle. Now I'm just going to go and delete our original protection element, and I'm going to go to floor plan. I'm just going to get rid of all of my dimensions before, because we're not going to make this a parametric handle. It's just going to be a straightforward handle that we freeform model. So I'm going to insert an image. So I'm going to get insert image. In this case, I'm going to load in a reference image that I can trace over. So there should be a folder in the contents for today's video called reference from GitHub, and I'm just going to load in this handle 1. And I'm going to use my scale tool to just scale down this drawing. So I'm going to make this to this 44 millimeters as per the drawing. I'm then going to center this on the center of the door handle, and I'm not going to make this too detailed. I'm not going to go over the top. I'm also going to go to, I think in this case, front view, and I'm just going to rotate this by 180 and then mirror it as well. I believe I should be able to mirror this image. Yep, and I'm going to place this where I would draw the family. So now I have essentially a plan and an elevation representation of the door handle I can use as reference. So I'm going to go to floor plan first. I'm just going to draw an extrusion, and I'm going to be pretty rough. So I'm just going to start, I'm going to do 44 times 172. So I'm just matching the drawing dimensions. And what I can do after that is just finesse it. So I'm going to move this down here and just say, okay, I'm going to move this off by 55, and then I'm going to center this on my door. I'm also going to draw the lock as well. So I'm going to go up from the middle by a whole number, so 40. I'm going to go out by 4, up by 15. In this case, I'm going to mirror this side of the lock. And then I'm just going to draw an arc. So I'm being pretty rough at this point. Yeah, very rough. I'm just going to probably do a bigger size than that. So in this case, I'm just being rough, pretty nominal. You could obviously make the keyhole like perfectly dimensioned. Probably no point. Anyway, at this point I do need to go, and I just need to get rid of that line that I drew for reference. And I've just drawn my faceplate, essentially. So if I go to front view, I can now pull this back based on my elevation my floor plan representation. I'm just going to make that 7. And I'm just going to draw the handle in plan. So I'm going to start by drawing the center line of the handle. I'm going to draw roughly to here, and then roughly to here. I'm then just going to measure roughly the thickness of the handle. So it's about 10. So I'm going to offset by 5 in both directions. In this case, it looks like that's a bit more. So I'm going to do 10 and 10. So I'm being extremely rough because at the end of the day, it's just a handle. It probably doesn't need to be like modeled to a super high level of LOD or level of development. I'm really just doing it so that I graphically have a door handle I can use. I'll go back to floor plan, and in this case I'm going to move it up, and I can see that it's sitting at -10, so I'm just going to make the other side 10 because its host plane is this reference plane here. And at that point I pretty much have a door handle that I can use, so I can go and just trace down those images, and I can go to manage images, and I'll just delete to make sure that the image doesn't live inside the family because it will add its file size. I'm going to go to 3D and just have a quick look at what I've built and see what I think. So it looks pretty good. The last thing I'm going to do is just copy this by 0 to the same place and just delete the border. This will fill in the keyhole, which I can then lower to maybe 4 mil. That way, if you do a render, you'll still see the inside of the keyhole. It won't show you the back of the door leaf. I can now select all these elements, and I'm going to apply the object style of hardware to them. So what I'm going to do is go manage object styles, and I'm going to reappropriate my protection category to hardware because we don't really need the protection category in this element anymore. So I'm going to call that hardware. I'm going to associate the protection finish, but again, I'm going to go and change the name of protection finish to hardware finish. And we can get rid of most of these parameters as well because we have all these parameters that we're not using anymore that we were using in our protection originally. So do make sure that you get rid of any unused parameters at this point. I'm going to make the height and the width 0, as well as the thickness because we're not using those parameters. And at that point, we should have essentially a nice little door handle that we can use. And we'll keep the original flip controls that we were using to change the orientation of the protection family. So you may recall that we have essentially, well, we did have, we must have deleted it. We'll place them again. So we'll go create, control, and I'm just going to put a double vertical and a double horizontal flip control. There we go. Go back to 3D, turn off my crop, and I've got a nice little thumbnail. It's a bit annoying with face-based families that you can't get a good orientation for the thumbnail. Typically, you're going to be looking up from below. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to load this into my leaf. And what I'm going to do is go to 3D, and I'm just going to hide all those dimensions. And at this point, this is the outside of my door. So I'm going to place a door handle here. I'm going to go to Component, Place on Face, and I'm just going to place on the face of my door. I'm then going to place another one. And actually, in this case, I need to place a new one. And I'm going to rotate the family with my flip controls until it sits the right way. There we go. I'm going to take both of these handles and give them an elevation from level. I'm going to set them to 1 meter so that they're 1 meter above the floor. I'm going to associate a parameter to that as well. I'm going to say handle height, and I'll make that an instant space parameter. So that at the door level, I can change the handle height. I'm going to add a parameter to the hardware finish as well and nest it, and just call that a hardware finish in the parameters. I'll make that instant spaced as well. From there, we're pretty much in business. We're just going to go into floor plan again, and we're going to constrain those two handles. Now, because they're face-based, we only need to constrain them in one direction. So we're going to constrain them just to that reference line that we already set up before we loaded them in. And now we should have full control over those handles. So if I want to inset my handles, I should just be able to change my handle inset to say 100, and you can see it pushes my handles in. And I should also be able to change the open angle of my door, and it will maintain the positioning of that door handle. So pretty much what we want. So it looks good. So we've got some door handles. Now let's look at something else. Let's look at adding a push bar instead. Slightly different way of generating this family. So I'm going to save as my handle, and I'm going to reappropriate this into a push bar or a panic bar. Let's just call it a panic bar, because it's really for fire doors essentially. I'm going to delete all these elements, go on the floor plan. Now we're going to host our panic bar from the edge of the door, because we don't want to center it on the door, because then we need another reference plane along the leaf in order to host this element. But what makes panic bars a bit unique is they're a fixed size. So they're not parametric. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to go have a look at the reference. So you can see in this case that it comes in a few sizes. In this case, we're just going to model the 876 type, including the caps. So in this case, we're going to be loading in this image again. And I'm going to be pretty rough with this one because it's just a panic bar at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be super accurate. But I'll load it in and I'll rescale it. In this case to 876. And in this case, we're really just trying to set up the basic profiles for the family. So I'm going to copy this and go to left view. So we're drawing across the plane of our panic bar at this point. But maybe I'll go and set up the references we're going to use first. So I'm going to go to floor plan. So this is going to be the side of our panic bar. I'm going to make this the right reference plane. And I'm going to create two reference planes, and I'm going to center one of them between them. So this represents the leaf width. So I'm going to associate the width parameter to that. This is going to be the middle of the panic bar. So in this case, I'm just going to make these not a reference and not a reference. I'm just going to call this panic bar center. And we're going to create extrusions that are always originated from this plane. So we're drawing in two directions by a fixed distance. So we don't really have to worry about setting up too many reference planes as a result. So I'm going to go to the left view, and I'm just going to start by drawing the casing for the panic bar. So I'm going to make sure that's 61 mil, like the sketch shows. So it's not the most accurate sketch in terms of scale, but I'll just be pretty rough. And I think this is 70 mil deep. On the drawing it says it's 70 mil from face to face, so I'm going to make that a little bit shallower. I'll make that 45 mil, and this is 61. Great. So in this case, I'm going to rehost the work plane to that central work plane. I'm going to offset it by 876 on 2. So I'm going to go equals 876 on 2. I'm then just going to make this 400. So I've sort of created an element that is relatively hosted from the center of the family. I'm not going to copy it to the same place, but I'm going to make these negative. I can see I've now got just two little pickups for the panic bar. I'm just going to copy this family, or this piece, and I'm going to set its constraints to negative 428 and 428. And what I'm going to do is move this up so that it is at 70. And I'll push this up a little bit so it's sitting sort of partially on the panic bar, partially not. I'm just going to add just a tiny bit of articulation to generate a faceplate. You can see I'm being pretty rough. And I'm just going to trim that so that that creates the effect that there's a pushable element in the middle of the panic bar. And I might also just inset this the tiniest bit. So I'll make that 5 and 5 just to create articulation. I'll then use my join tool, and I'm just going to join them all together so that it looks quite seamless. So we get something that looks quite nice, that only takes 3 extrusions and doesn't require many reference planes. So nice and easy. I'm just going to reassign their object style to hardware, and also their material to hardware finish. But at that point, that's literally all we really need for our panic bar. So in this case, I'm just going to make sure all my images have been deleted. I'm going to go and manage them out under manage images. I'll just do a quick purge. Good. And at this point, I can just update my thumbnail. But that's pretty much it for the panic bar. Nice and straightforward. And it will always be a fixed size. Now you could obviously make that parametric if you wanted to. So I'll save, and I'm going to load this into my leaf as well. Now in this case, I'm only going to place it on the inside face because you're always going to push out when you activate this this panic bar. So I'm going to place on face. And in this case, I do need to face it the other way, I believe. Yes, I'm going to face it this way so that I'm going to host it to the inside face of the door. So I do need to find that reference plane. Notice that it's here currently, but that's because at the moment the width is set to be free. I'm going to replace that and nest it with the width parameter in the door so that it always keeps the panic bar centered on the overall length that the family is defined by. I'm then going to host the hardware finish. And in this case, I'll just put it at the same height as the door handle. So I'm going to reuse my handle height parameter. And I'm just going to find my reference line that represents the end of my door and use that to align the reference that defines the start of this panic bar. So at this point, we should have handles and a panic bar. Now, obviously, when we have a panic bar, we don't have a door handle. So I'm going to set up a visibility parameter, and I'm going to call it panic bar. I'll make it instance based, and I'm going to make this a visibility parameter. I'm then going to take the other handle, and I'm going to make this a visibility parameter again, but I'm just going to say not panic bar. I'll make it instance based, and I'll put it under other. The reason I'm putting it under other is because I'm going to drive it with a formula. So in this case, when we have a panic bar, we want this parameter to be off and vice versa. So I'm going to say in the formula, not panic bar. And essentially when the panic bar is off, the handle is on. And when the panic bar is on, the handle is off. This way, we can always make sure we only have one or the other. So at this point, we can see both. I'm also going to take my handles and make them all only visible at fine detail and not visible in plan. The last thing we need is a door closer up in the corner. Now this one's really easy essentially. So all we need to do for this is obviously save as, and we're essentially just going to set up another family. So I'm going to just call this closer. The only difference with this is the elevation that we hosted at, which is obviously at the top of the door. So in this case, I'm just going to delete these reference planes. I'll keep the flip controls. We're going to host it from this top corner downwards. So in this case, we're going to set the top to be the height of the leaf, and it's going to be modeled down from there. Now in this case, the reference is so easy that we probably don't even need to load it in. Now I'm not going to go and make the parametric elbow. It's just a waste of effort, and it's probably too complicated really for this series. It is possible, but I'd say it's a waste of time. In this case, I'm just really using the dimensions. So we've got 114 and 264. So I'll start with those. 114 and 264. Remember, I'm drawing front on at the moment. I'm then also just going to check the remaining dimensions. So it's 44 deep and 73 high. So it's 73 high. I'll make these all not a reference. And then I'm just going to model an extrusion. I'm going to lock it to those reference planes, just in case we want to come back and make this parametric. I'm going to make it 44 deep. But at that point, all I have to do is just associate the hardware finish, and in this case, the hardware. And that's quite straightforward. So I'm just going to crop the view around it. But that's essentially all we need to do. So sometimes hardware is really simple, depending on how complex you want to make it look. So I'm going to save this, and now we get to the harder part. So we're going to load this in, and we're just going to load this in the leaf. Now I'm going to put it up the top. So I'm going to place another closer up here. So it's going to be constrained to this corner. Now the problem is in floor plan, I can't currently see my closer, so I can't constrain it. In order to raise my view range, which is possible, I select my view on the browser, and I'll set my view range to 2 meters. So I'm picking up the closer now, and I can dimension it and constrain it. In this case, I'm just going to constrain it to the front of the door. So I'm going to get my reference line here, and I'm just going to find that snap point and lock it. Now I have a closer, which I can work with. In this case, I'll associate the hardware finish parameter again. For the elevation from level, I'm going to set it to the door height, or the leaf height. And then it will always sit at the top of the leaf. I've left a couple of dimensions in there by accident, such as the width and the height, but they're pretty much irrelevant. So I can just ignore them in this case. But now we have a closer, handles, and a push bar. I'll just make a visibility parameter and associate it to that closer. So I'm going to make it an instance-based parameter and a visibility parameter. Now all we have to do is set the parameters at the family level to the hardware. So I'll overwrite, and now you can see we have our hardware. Notice now we don't have the handle here because the push bar is on. So we only see them together in the family environment. So I'm now going to add a shared parameter for the hardware finish for the door hardware. So I'm going to go materials for door in my shared parameter file, and I'll associate this parameter. Now, actually I made it instance-based. It's probably better off being type-based in this case, because usually the hardware is going to be the same finish for nearly every type of door, probably just stainless steel or something like that. As well as this, we also need some parameters to control our hardware. So we need one parameter to control the handle height. So in this case, I have a shared parameter that I use for this. So in my door dimensions in my shared parameter file, I have a parameter called handle mounting height, which I'll make a type-based parameter. And I also have a parameter for the handle inset, which I'll associate using a shared parameter. Doesn't have to be shared, but it depends on whether you want to schedule it or be able to access it in a tag, for example. I'm then going to add a parameter for the closer. Now in this case, I'm just going to use a family parameter. I'm just going to call it closer, and I'm going to make it instance-based. Just give me a second. I'm trying to step up on my keyboard. He's not behaving today. I'm also going to make a parameter for the panic bar. Now you could make these shared parameters. I'm just saving myself a little bit of time. I'll put them both under visibility. I'll close my door so my door has a nicer preview. I'll save it, and I'll just test it in a project, and we'll just see if everything works as intended, and it should do. I'll just make an Autodesk template. I'm going to load in this door. Keep in mind we only have one type in the door at the moment. So I'll place a door, and I'll just copy it a few times. It looks like I forgot to change the detail level and the representation of the door closer. So what I might do is just go back to my leaf, select my closer, turn off its plan representation, and limit it to fine detail only. That's better. Now I'll load that back into my door, and then load my door back into my project. Now that should hide my closer. Great. So we can obviously open our door by a range of angles. We should be able to change the number of hinges that we have as well. If we go to fine detail, we can see them. So I can go 2 hinges, I can go 4 hinges. I can also turn off my closer. And I can also turn off my panic bar. And if I do, I get a door handle. And you can see that anything that's instance-based is supportable in multiple doors at the same time. So nice and straightforward. Anyway, in the next part, we're going to be looking at a different way that we can achieve angled door components, which is going to allow us to actually put a system in place where at the project level, we're going to be able to swap out handles for different types of handles, panic bars for different types of panic bars, different types of leafs. The possibilities are pretty much endless. So we are going to be looking at that quite shortly. Remember, we can also still change our door frame as well to a different type if we load different frames into our family. This is going to be pretty much the system that we use for hardware as well in this alternative approach. But that's the next part. So that's pretty much all for this session. Hopefully that helps teach you about just some modeling techniques for making little components like door handles, but also how you can associate them to reference lines and obviously set up a family that still swings but also supports elements upon the face of the leaf. So the files for this session will be on GitHub so that you can continue in the next session where we're going to explore some different techniques. So thanks for watching today. If you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. I make videos usually 2 times a week and aim to do so for a long time. And I look forward to seeing you in future parts of the series and just videos in general. Thanks. Take care. Bye.